In this video, I'd like to discuss Sacramento's Measure O from 2022, also known as the Emergency Shelter Enforcement Act of 2022. So, the path to the ballot, how this got on the ballot. During an August 9th, 2022, City of Sacramento, the City Council meeting, 7 members, or 7 people, the 6 council members and the mayor, voted in favor of placing the measure on the ballot, while 2 council members voted against placing the measure on the ballot. The result of the election, 70,016 people, or 52% of the people who voted yes for the measure, and 64,404 people, also around 48% of the people who voted no on the measure. So what is it really about? So going through it, if you have a piece about providing emergency shelters, so within 90 days of the act being effective, the city manager will authorize emergency shelter spaces that fulfill 20% of the minimum threshold. The minimum threshold is the number of unhoused people, and I believe 60% of that. If 60% of the authorized emergency shelter spaces are being used within 30 days, the city manager must authorize additional emergency shelter spaces that total an additional 20% of the minimum threshold. So you start at 20 and then you keep adding up. Shelter spaces should be available in every council district. And the main reason for that is to avoid having too many shelter spaces in one council district. And the city manager will inform city employees and contractors of available emergency shelter spaces daily by 5 p.m. This includes people who have a lot of contact with the unhoused, including police officers. Solving the problem, the city manager will collect data regarding emergency shelter spaces provided and encampments eliminated, provide a report to the city council every 30 days. 5 days a week, the city manager will deploy city personnel or contractors to conduct research, 5 days a week, the city manager will deploy city personnel or contractors to conduct outreach to persons unlawfully camping, and usually when there would be research on what the population is, the numbers of it and how many resources are being provided. But the main point of this is that outreach, trying to help these people who are unlawfully camping get into a housing situation. And these 5 days a week would be in certain areas that the city manager deems city personnel or contractors to be most useful in. Outreach includes contacting persons who are illegally camping with appropriate county social services agencies. Outreach also is including assistance in relocating the people who are unlawfully camping to go to an alternative shelter. And a piece of this in helping that relocation, the city approves purchases of personal property. An equal and fair or a fair value for personal property is allowed to be paid by the city to purchase someone who is unlawfully camping their property, to assist in having less belongings but having more funds to be able to go move somewhere else. Enforcement of unlawful camping may not occur unless emergency shelter space is available for the person unlawfully camping. The city manager has offered the individual emergency shelter space, and the individual refuses emergency shelter space and refuses to move from public property. So 4 pieces. Basically, the person unlawfully camping, there's shelter space available for them. There's, that shelter space has been offered. The individual refuses then that shelter space, and then also refuses to move from public property, then the enforcement can occur. All of those 4 have to be met. And unlawful encampment, which was decided in this measure, or was defined as, is unlawful on public property to camp, occupy camp facilities, use camp paraphernalia, but also another piece which it's unlawful to do is accumulate or fail to properly dispose of waste. So those 4 items. So one of the main ways that the camping, the enforcement, the city is running into issues, as you'll see within the funding area, how much is allocated. But something the city can do or is to use to help reduce the people unlawfully camping and help them get connected with better services is a resident complaint. So residents harmed by unlawful camping or unlawful storage on public property owned by the city can commence proceedings against the city to abate the unlawful violations. To require the city to abate the unlawful violation, the resident must file a notice and demand with the city. So that's something you have to file, and that form is available, and that is, I believe, an online form. The resident must include with this notice the location of the public property where the violation is occurring, must also include a description of the conditions that constitute a violation. And that's the second point. The third point is they must include a description of the harm caused to the resident by the violation. And fourth, the resident must include in this form a demand that the city abate the violation. Now, within 20 days of the city receiving this notice and demand form, the city will inspect the public property in question and will respond with one of these four responses. A response saying that the city will abate the violation within 45 days. And that's 45 days since the notice and demand is filed. The second option is that the city will need 30 additional days to abate the violation. Third option is that the city does not own the property in question, so they will not abate the violation. Or fourth, that they will question that a violation actually exists. But these last two options, there are some legal actions that residents can take. The city manager does not cure the violation within the time prescribed, then the resident may seek an appeal, where the city must abate a violation, and if it's found that the city must abate a violation, then the city can be ordered to take appropriate action to abate the violation. And then if a resident is successful with their appeal of, well, the city, doesn't think that the violation can be abated, but then, the appeal says that the city does have to do that, then the resident may recover costs associated with that appeal. Funding, this is the main point. There's a lot of larger entities funding above the city, including county and such, which can help towards the problem. And then there's a certain amount of the city's budget, which can be used towards it. The maximum amount the city can use is $5 million annually to enforce the act. The city, uses a lot of that already on this, so it's hard to enforce this as a lot of those funds have been used, and only $5 million is allocated towards enforcement of this act each year. So the final part about this, for this act to be enforceable, the city and county created partnerships. So that act can only be effective the city of Sacramento and the county of Sacramento into a legally binding partnership to improve the homelessness crisis. This is because the county of Sacramento has a lot more financial resources and such, which can help solve the crisis of all the unhoused and what is defined as the homelessness crisis in the act. And if that's done, they can provide these resources to people, then the act can take effect. And that is basically the recap of what that act